Hey everyone. Today we're going to really get into the nitty-gritty of canine brain tumors.
Okay.
It's it's a heavy topic, but we're putting on our neurology hats today. We're going to be looking at how vets use MRI to diagnose these really tricky cases.
Right.
And we're focusing on the big ones, right? Meningiomas, gliomas, and those choroid plexus tumors. Those are always fun.
Yeah, they can be tricky.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah.
Luckily, I have you, our expert, to guide us through these brain scans. You ready to unleash some serious brain power on this deep dive?
I think so. Let's see what we've got.
Okay, so before we get lost in the pixels of MRI scans,
Sure.
can you give us a quick overview? How common are brain tumors in dogs anyway? I feel like we hear about it a lot, but is it really that common?
Well, actually, you might be surprised to hear that brain tumors are relatively uncommon in dogs. They make up about 2 to 5% of all diagnosed cancers.
Okay, so less common than we might think, but
Yeah.
2 to 5%, that's still a lot of dogs.
Absolutely.
So early detection is key here.
Absolutely. The sooner we diagnose it, the better the chances of successful treatment and a positive outcome for the dog.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about those warning signs.
Okay.
What should pet owners be looking out for? What are some of those red flags that maybe something's up, upstairs in their furry friend?
Yeah, so the clinical signs of a brain tumor, they can be pretty varied.
Right.
It really depends on the location of the tumor and the size. But some common red flags would be things like seizures,
Okay.
sudden changes in behavior or personality.
Like what?
So, say, a usually friendly dog might become a bit more withdrawn, maybe a little irritable, difficulty walking or keeping their balance,
Oh,
head tilting, and then some vision problems.
so if my dog forgets how to I don't know, shake a paw or starts bumping into the furniture, should I be really worried? Could that be a brain tumor?
Yeah, potentially. That could be an indication of a tumor affecting the frontal lobe, which is the part of the brain that's in charge of those higher cognitive functions. Right.
Learning, memory, spatial awareness.
Wow. So that's really scary, but it's good to know. So that's where MRI comes in, right?
Yeah.
This amazing technology that lets vets actually see inside the brain. It's like magic.
It's pretty close to magic. Magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, is the gold standard for diagnosing brain tumors in dogs.
Okay.
And it provides really detailed images of the brain so we can see the tumor itself,
Right.
but also the size of it, the location, and some specific characteristics.
Oh, interesting.
There are other tools too,
Okay.
like cerebrospinal fluid analysis that can give us some information.
Right.
But MRI is definitely the most accurate and comprehensive for this.
So it's like the top dog of brain scans.
You could say that? Yeah.
Okay. So let's say you're a vet. You're looking at an MRI of a dog's brain.
Yeah.
What are you looking for specifically? What are some of the things that help you say, aha, this is what we're dealing with?
So we're searching for features that can help us differentiate between the different tumor types.
For example, meningiomas, which are the most common type we see in dogs.
Right.
These typically show up as a single, well-defined mass, and they have this broad base where they attach to the skull.
So it's almost like they have a little stalk connecting them to the skull.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Okay.
And another thing about meningiomas is that they often light up brightly with a contrast dye.
Okay, so you inject something into them.
Yeah, we inject it intravenously before the MRI.
And why is that? Why is it important if it lights up?
Well, bright enhancement usually means there's a good blood supply,
Okay.
which is important to know when we're considering treatment.
Right, so brighter is usually better in this case?
It can be, yeah.
Okay.
But every tumor is unique, of course, and treatment decisions are always made on a case-by-case basis.
Of course, of course. I was reading one of the papers, and it mentioned something called a dural tail. You ever heard of that? What is that exactly?
Yes, the dural tail. It's basically a tail-like extension of the tumor that we can sometimes see on these MRI scans.
Interesting.
And it is often associated with meningiomas. It's basically caused by the tumor tugging on the surrounding membranes.
Which are?
The meninges, they cover and protect the brain and spinal cord.
Right, right.
And while it's common with meningiomas, it's not a surefire sign. Other tumor types can sometimes have it too.
So it's a clue, but not like a smoking gun.
Exactly, and that's why we always say that MRI, even though it's super valuable, doesn't give us the whole picture.
Right, okay.
To truly know what we're dealing with and to figure out the tumor's subtype and grade.
Which is important for treatment, right?
Exactly. We need a biopsy and histopathology.
So it's like a 1-2 punch, high-tech imaging to guide us, And then good old-fashioned lab work to confirm.
You got it.
Okay, so we talked about meningiomas. What about those other common types? We've got gliomas and those choroid plexus tumors. What do they look like on an MRI? How can you tell them apart?
Good question. Gliomas are trickier.
Trickier. How so?
Well, they can look very different on an MRI. See, they arise from the supporting cells of the brain, the glial cells, and unlike meningiomas, which start outside the brain tissue, gliomas actually grow within the brain tissue itself.
Oh, I see.
So that means they can blend in with the surrounding brain tissue, making their borders less defined.
So if meningiomas are like, say, grapes on a vine,
Oh, okay.
gliomas are more like, I don't know, chameleons blending into their background.
That's actually a great analogy, and that makes them very challenging to diagnose.
Right, because they're hiding.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Even with the high resolution of an MRI, it can be hard to differentiate them from, say, a stroke or inflammation.
Wow, okay. What about those choroid plexus tumors? Anything unique about them on an MRI?
Yes, they usually have a very distinct look. They arise from the choroid plexus, which is in the ventricles of the brain,
The ventricles being...
the fluid-filled spaces within the brain.
Right, right.
One key feature is that they usually light up very brightly with the contrast dye.
So they're like attention seekers.
You could say that, but their most interesting and potentially concerning characteristic is that they tend to spread through the cerebrospinal fluid, which, as you know, flows throughout the brain and spinal cord.
Oh, no. So these tumor cells can travel
Yes,
to other parts of the brain.
that's right, and even the spinal cord.
They're in trouble.
We call it drop metastasis, and it's this feature that helps us tell the difference between choroid plexus papillomas, which are benign and slow-growing,
Okay.
and choroid plexus carcinomas, which are malignant and much more likely to spread.
So that's not good.
No, not so much. Understanding these features on an MRI is super important for figuring out how bad it is and planning the best treatment strategy.
Wow, this is a lot to take in.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's fascinating, though.
It is. It's amazing what we can learn from these scans.
Absolutely.
It is, and we've only scratched the surface of what we can learn from MRI.
Okay, good, because I think my brain needs a little bit more unpacking here. We talked about some general stuff that vets look for on MRIs.
Right.
But I'm wondering, are there, like, more specific details that help differentiate, say, a meningioma from a glioma?
Okay.
I mean, it can't always be as easy as attached to the skull or not attached.
Or it's often more nuanced than that. One of the things we look at is the border of the tumor, how it looks against the brain tissue.
Okay.
That's called margination.
Hmm.
Meningiomas, remember, they're well-defined, they grow slowly, so they tend to have these very sharp borders,
Okay.
like a cookie cutter.
Got it.
Gliomas, on the other hand, they can be more infiltrative. They kind of weave themselves into that surrounding brain tissue, so their borders are fuzzier.
Oh, okay.
It's like, imagine a blob of dough spreading out on a baking sheet.
Okay. Yeah, it's not so neat and tidy.
Exactly. So sharper borders, probably a meningioma.
Okay.
Fuzzier, maybe a glioma.
Got it.
And then we also look at what we call signal intensity.
Okay, that sounds complicated.
It's not too bad. Basically, it's how bright or dark the tumor appears on different types of MRI sequences.
Right.
Don't worry too much about the specifics of the sequences, but just know that different tissues light up differently, and that helps us figure out what's what.
Okay.
So, for example, on a T1 weighted image, meningiomas are usually what we call isointense or hypointense,
Meaning.
either the same brightness as normal brain tissue or a little darker.
Gotcha.
But here's where it gets cool. On T2 weighted images, which highlight water, meningiomas often show up brighter than the surrounding tissue. We call that hyperintense.
Because it's like they have their own little light show going on.
Right. And each tumor type has a sort of characteristic pattern,
Okay.
a fingerprint that helps us narrow down the possibilities.
I like that, the fingerprint. What about gliomas? What do their fingerprints look like?
Gliomas, they're tricky. Their signal intensity on those T1 and T2 images can be all over the place.
This is not as clear cut.
Nope. They can be isointense, hypointense, or hyperintense.
Oh, so they're like, guess what? Could be anything.
Pretty much. Keeps us on our toes. So we got to take all those clues together, location, borders, that signal intensity, and then, of course, the contrast enhancement we talked about.
Right, the glow up. So do meningiomas and gliomas, do they glow up differently?
Yes, they do. Meningiomas usually show this strong, even contrast enhancement,
Okay.
meaning they light up brightly and evenly after we inject the dye.
Okay.
Gliomas, again, less predictable.
Of course.
They might not enhance at all, or we see that ring pattern, or it could be patchy and uneven.
So if MRI findings were like profiles on a dating app, meningiomas are the ones with the clear, well-lit photos, and gliomas are using those blurry, artsy filters.
That's a great analogy. But you're right, even with all these variations, experienced veterinary radiologists, they can usually make a pretty good guess based on the MRI even before the biopsy.
Really?
Yeah, it's like they're putting together a puzzle.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
It really is. But you mentioned some other rarer types of tumors, ependymomas, germinomas, embryonal tumors.
Right.
What makes them so challenging is that we just don't see them as often.
Because they're so rare.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we don't have as much information about them. It's like trying to write a travel guide about a country you've only visited once.
So every case is super valuable.
Absolutely. Every single case helps us understand these tumors better. Ependymomas, for instance, they come from the cells lining the ventricles.
The ventricles, again, being...
Those fluid-filled spaces in the brain.
Right. Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah.
And they can look a lot like other, more common tumors, so that's tricky. Germinomas, they're even rarer. They come from germ cells, usually found in the reproductive organs.
Okay.
And they tend to pop up near the base of the brain, which can make them easy to mistake for pituitary tumors. And then embryonal tumors, that's a whole other category.
Or category?
Yeah, it's a diverse group. They develop from embryonic tissues, and they can look very different on an MRI depending on the specific type.
So it sounds like diagnosing these rare tumors takes a lot of detective work.
It does. It really does. You have to look at the MRI, the dog's symptoms, their breed, sometimes even do more advanced testing.
Wow. Okay. Now, we touched on CSF analysis earlier, and I have to admit, I'm not totally sure what that even is.
Oh, sure. CSF stands for cerebrospinal fluid.
Okay.
It's the fluid that surrounds your brain and spinal cord, basically cushions and protects them.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to brain tumors, analyzing a sample of this fluid can give us some extra clues.
Okay, so it's like we're tapping into the brain's mail system or something.
Something like that. We're analyzing the environment around the brain. Now, we can't diagnose a specific tumor type just from CSF,
Okay.
but it can support our suspicions or tell us we need to look somewhere else.
Examples.
Sure, if the protein levels are high, that could mean there's inflammation, which a tumor could cause. Or in some cases, like with lymphoma, we might actually find tumor cells floating around in the CSF.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's a game changer for diagnosis.
Okay, so it's another piece of the puzzle.
Ex-
Now, I do want to circle back to those fancy MRI techniques you mentioned.
Okay.
The DWI, the spectroscopy, perfusion-weighted imaging.
Right.
Are these, like, used all the time? What can they tell us?
They're like adding a super zoom lens to our regular MRI.
Ooh, I like that.
They're not always necessary, but they can be super helpful in certain situations.
So give me the rundown, starting with DWI. What is that?
Okay, so DWI, or diffusion-weighted imaging, it looks at how water moves within the brain tissue. And tumors, they often restrict that water movement because they're so much denser than normal tissue.
So, like, imagine trying to pour water through a sponge versus a rock.
Exactly. DWI picks up on those subtle differences, and that helps us decide if a lesion is more likely a tumor or something else, like a stroke.
Okay, that's amazing. What about spectroscopy?
Now, spectroscopy, this one's really cool.
Okay, sell me.
It lets us study the chemical makeup of the tumor without actually doing a biopsy.
Wait, how?
We use a strong magnet to basically identify the different elements within the tumor. And by analyzing the different signals we get clues about its activity, maybe even its type.
So we're eavesdropping on the tumor's chemical conversations.
In a way, yes. And finally, perfusion-weighted imaging. That one looks at blood flow.
Okay.
How much blood is going to the tumor, how fast it's moving.
Interesting.
This tells us about the tumor's vascularity, how many blood vessels it has.
And why is that important?
Well, highly vascular tumors tend to grow faster, and they can be more difficult to treat.
So it's like a traffic report for blood cells in the tumor.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And by combining all this info from the different MRI techniques,
Okay.
we get this really detailed picture of the tumor, its size, location, blood supply, even how it might behave.
Wow.
It's truly remarkable how advanced this technology has become.
It is, but I imagine, like with anything, experience still plays a big role, right?
Oh, absolutely. Even with all these fancy tools, you still have to consider everything else, the dog's symptoms, their breed, other test results like that CSF analysis and the biopsy. It's all about putting those puzzle pieces together to get the full picture.
And that's what makes it so challenging, I imagine.
It does, but that's also what makes it so rewarding.
For sure. Yeah. And, as cool as all this tech stuff is, at the end of the day, it's really about the dogs and their families.
Right, of course.
We're going through this.
Absolutely. It's all about giving the best care we can and supporting those families because it's a lot.
Yeah, it really is. So let's talk about treatment.
Okay.
We've mentioned surgery, radiation, chemotherapy.
Right.
Can you walk us through those? Like, what are the pros and cons of each?
Sure. So the best way to treat these tumors really depends on a bunch of things. The type of tumor, where it is, how big it is, the dog's age, their overall health.
Right.
And, of course, what the owner wants and what they can do.
Makes sense.
It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Right. So it's about having those honest conversations between the vet and the owner.
Absolutely. Finding the best path forward together.
Okay, so let's break it down, starting with surgery. When is that a good option?
Well, if the tumor is well-defined,
Okay.
easy to get to, and hasn't spread, surgery is often the first thing we'll try.
Okay.
The goal is to get rid of as much of the tumor as possible without messing with the surrounding brain tissue.
I bet that's incredibly difficult.
It is. It requires a high level of precision.
Right.
It's like this delicate dance between getting the tumor out and keeping the brain working properly.
Wow. Okay. So are there times when even the best surgeon can't operate?
Yeah, sometimes. Some tumors are just in really bad spots.
Like deep inside?
Yeah, or they might be too intertwined with important parts of the brain, so it's too risky.
That makes sense. So what happens then?
Well, that's where radiation therapy comes in.
Okay.
We use high-energy rays to target and destroy those tumor cells.
So we're zapping them.
Basically. It can be used after surgery to get any leftover cells,
Okay.
or it can be the main treatment if surgery isn't an option.
And has radiation therapy gotten better over time?
Oh, for sure. It's much more precise now.
Meaning?
We can target the tumor more effectively and do less damage to the healthy tissue.
Okay, good. What about chemo? How does that work for brain tumors?
So chemotherapy uses drugs to kill cancer cells, and we can use it in a few ways.
Okay.
We can use it with surgery or radiation to boost their effectiveness, or we can use it on its own.
And when would you do that?
Well, sometimes we use it as a palliative treatment.
Meaning?
It's about improving their quality of life, even if we can't cure them.
So making them more comfortable.
Right. For brain tumors, this might mean shrinking the tumor a bit,
Okay.
relieving some of that pressure, controlling seizures, helping them walk better.
So it's about focusing on how they feel, not just how long they live.
Exactly.
That's so important. I think people hear palliative and they think it means giving up.
I know, but it's really not.
Yeah.
It's about shifting our focus to their comfort and well-being.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, when a dog is diagnosed with a brain tumor, everyone wants to know how long they have. What factors influence that?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's tough to give a straight answer because it depends on so many things.
So you can't just say, oh, this type of tumor means this many months.
I wish it were that simple.
Tough.
But some of the key things we look at are tumor type, how aggressive it is, where it's located, how big it is, whether it's spread,
Okay.
and of course the dog's overall health and how well they respond to treatment.
Right, because some dogs are just fighters.
Absolutely. Age plays a role too. Younger dogs tend to have stronger immune systems,
Yeah.
but they might also be more sensitive to some treatments, so it's a balancing act.
Wow, it really is complex.
It is, and that's why communication is key throughout the whole process.
Working together, the vet, the owner, to make the best decisions.
Exactly. And, even with brain tumors, there's always hope.
That's good to hear.
We're learning more all the time. We're developing new treatments.
Like what? Anything you're particularly excited about?
Well, immunotherapy is showing a lot of promise.
Immunotherapy meaning?
Basically, we're training the body's own immune system to fight the cancer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. We're also working on new imaging techniques.
Even more advanced than what we talked about.
Oh, yeah. Imagine being able to see the tumor's DNA and personalize treatments based on that.
Wow, that sounds like science fiction.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But it's getting closer all the time.
Amazing.
And don't forget about those liquid biopsies.
Oh, right, the blood test.
Exactly. Instead of doing surgery.
Just check their blood.
Uh-huh.
Well, we're not there yet, but we're getting closer. It could revolutionize how we monitor these tumors.
That's incredible.
It's an exciting time to be in this field. There's so much happening.
It really sounds like it.
New discoveries all the time.
Oh, this has been amazing.
Mag, you think so?
We've really gone deep on canine brain tumors today.
We have, from the MRI to the different types.
Treatment, ethical considerations. It's been a pleasure sharing what I know, and I hope your listeners learned a lot.
I know I did. This is definitely one of those topics that can feel overwhelming.
Right.
But knowledge is power.
Right, absolutely.
So, to all you pet parents out there, talk to your vets, ask questions, stay informed.
Couldn't agree more.
And of course, give those pups some extra love.
The best medicine.
From Vet NeuroJar, keep those minds inspired, hearts light, and tails wagging.